New York City wanted to cut this street, which is now Pine Street, but it was called Albany Street back in the 1850s. The city wanted to commandeer this end of the churchyard and cut the street through all the way to the other side of the churchyard, to basically where the American Stock Exchange building is now, to cut that street through all the way to Greenwich. And the city was up in arms about this because so many Revolutionary soldiers were buried in this end of the churchyard. And people in the neighborhood were having meetings, posting broadsides, publishing newspaper ads about it, railing against the city for wanting to disturb the graves of the Revolutionary soldiers. And it was around that same time that the vestry decided to put up the Soldiers Monument, the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, in memory of those men who had died in captivity and were buried here in the churchyard. So like I mentioned, a lot of soldiers and veterans of the Revolution are buried here in Trinity Churchyard, but in unmarked graves. Either their gravestone had eroded over time, so we don't know where they were buried, or they were buried in an unmarked grave. That could happen as well. One of our more famous residents in the churchyard is Francis Lewis, who is the only signer of the Declaration of Independence to be buried in Manhattan. He was a member of Trinity Church, and he was, of course, a delegate to Continental Congress, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And when he died, he was buried in Trinity Churchyard. But he is one of those, we don't know where he was buried. His gravestone had disappeared by the time that the inventory of the churchyard was taken in 1897. Surprisingly, it's the first inventory of the churchyard, marking where everyone's gravestone was and what was written on all of them. But it took that long to have an inventory made, and by that time, Francis Lewis's gravestone had eroded or collapsed or been destroyed by a falling tree branch or something like that. So we don't know where he's buried, but we do know he's buried here. His burial record is in our burial register that we keep in archives. So the person in the churchyard that I think kind of most embodies the spirit of what the ideals of the Revolution were and what those guys were trying to achieve when we wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation, what that kind of ideal nation was supposed to be. I think the person I think of in the churchyard who lives into all of those ideals the most is Albert Gallatin. He was a Swiss student who was so inspired by the ideals of the Revolution that he moved from Geneva to Boston in his 20s. And after spending a couple of years in Boston, moved to Pennsylvania to start farming. And he was a farmer and land surveyor in Pennsylvania. He served in the Pennsylvania state legislature for several years before being elected to the Senate and the House. For several years after that, he also served as Thomas Jefferson and James Madison's Secretary of the Treasury. He was a negotiator of the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the Napoleonic Wars. And he was also ambassador to France and Britain. He had a very long political career. Among his political activities, he was a founder of NYU, a founder of the American Ethnological Society, which was the first group in the States to study different ethnicities, and a founder of the New York Historical Society, which is still around today. We are standing in the third Trinity Church building to sit on this site. This building was consecrated in 1846. It was designed by Richard Upjohn, who was a famous architect at the time. The church is a neo-Gothic structure, which was very new and different in the Americas at that time. The stained glass windows, the ceiling height, the arches, the chandeliers, the carvings, these are all indicative of neo-Gothic architecture. It's meant to evoke the cathedrals of Europe built in the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. Different to most architects, Richard Upjohn, in addition to designing the building, also designed the stained glass windows and the nave organ case, which was very unusual for the time because architects traditionally did not design stained glass windows or organ cases.
And I'm Michael Bird, the vicar here at Trinity Church. We're standing right now beneath two important portraits in the history of our country, and certainly as it intersects the history of Trinity Church. The top portrait is Father Inglis, who was the rector of Trinity Church leading up to the American Revolution, and who very poignantly and very clearly was a loyalist. The story goes that when George Washington was coming to church, Inglis was asked to change the prayers to exclude praying for the king and the king's family, and Inglis refused the request. So Washington was there, the prayer was had, and people felt all the feelings that they might feel at the time. Ultimately, Inglis's time at Trinity came to an end. Father Inglis's term as rector began in 1776 and went till 1783. And then because it was a little hot here and people had lots of opinions, he was sent up to Nova Scotia and became the first bishop up there. Clearly tied into their British heritage more than we were at the point. Below Father Inglis is Samuel Provost, who was an assistant at Trinity Church and who sided with the Patriots, but who was asked to leave his position because of his position, probably, and was brought back in 1784 to be rector of Trinity Church as our country was being formed, and to cement Trinity Church's place in that story. Provost later went on to become the first bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of New York. As we stand here next to these two portraits, we'll also recognize that they're put here in the order that they served. We're not asserting that the loyalist rector somehow was better than the patriot rector. But the moment that this sort of describes gets to the heart of what it's like to be a church in difficult times. Right? You can imagine in the city of New York that there were as many opinions as there were people, and two sort of dominant opinions. And the church's job is to hold people together, right? To think about something higher, broader, better, deeper, truer, right? Which is our call to love one another and care for one another, even across difference. Right? The work that Inglis had to do, whether successful or not, the work that Provost had to do, whether successful or not, is still the work that the church is called to do, and seems particularly appropriate at this time, right? To hold people across difference and remind them of all the things we have in common, right? The deep, beautiful things. I think it's very fair to say that Trinity Church deliberately and carefully cultivated in people an understanding that they are meant to look after the most vulnerable, that they are meant to work towards the highest and best thing. And that's why our churchyard is full of people who gave of themselves or what they have for the betterment of others, right? We certainly see that in Hamilton. We would see that in Eliza for sure. We see that in John Watts, the Leakin Watts Orphan Asylum. We see it in the way the Astor family looked after the city of New York and others, right? We can see that sort of over and over again across our churchyards. And that feels very much like what Trinity Church understood its role as in the city of New York, right? To help lift people up. And we were surrounded, right? The church was filled with the most amazing people who had brave ideas, and they were imaginative and they were creative and had the wherewithal to actually stick to it and move to the realization of something, right? They didn't stop with the idea. They got to the execution. And that's right, that's a beautiful thing that I think is very much a part of our history.
So here we are at St. Paul's Chapel. We are about 4 blocks north of Trinity Church on Broadway at Fulton Street. St. Paul's Chapel was built in 1766 as a chapel of ease for Trinity Parish. Back in 1766, this neighborhood did not exist. This neighborhood was farmland. There were apple orchards all around St. Paul's at that point. So Trinity built the chapel to make going to church easy for members of the congregation who lived out in the farmland uptown. The first thing you notice when you look at St. Paul's from Broadway is the Montgomery Monument. This is a monument to Major General Richard Montgomery, who was the first Continental officer to die in the Revolutionary War. He died during the Battle of Quebec, and he was initially buried in Quebec by the British Army officers. His remains were returned to New York in 1818, and he is buried here under the porch of St. Paul's Chapel. This was the first monument to a officer of the Army erected by order of Congress. This was the first monument that Congress ordered to be built. But of course, the war was happening, so it took many years for this memorial to actually be built. Benjamin Franklin was in charge of arranging for this monument, and he employed French sculptor Jean-Jacques Caffieri to do the monument. So Caffieri worked in Paris to make the monument, and it was shipped over to New York. As you walk into St. Paul's, one of the first things you notice, of course, is the altarpiece. This is the Glory altarpiece that was commissioned in 1788 to actually block the shadow caused in the window by the Montgomery Monument. You noticed it was kind of triangle shaped, so it cast this big triangle shaped shadow inside the chapel during worship, which was not a great look. So the vestry commissioned the new altarpiece to cover up the back of the monument, but also create a beautiful showpiece for worship. The altarpiece stands, of course, in front of the altar and the pulpit. The pulpit actually is original to the chapel. It is from 1766, but the pulpit, rather than being off to the side, used to stand right here in the middle of the chapel, because in the 1760s, the focus of Episcopal worship, of Church of England at that time, worship, was the sermon. It was the preaching, rather than the focus of the service now being on the Eucharist, being on the altar. So during a renovation, they moved the pulpit over, but it still is representative of the church and the pulpit and the look of the chapel at that time. Up in the corner, you can see the original tulip wood statue of St. Paul. If you look at St. Paul's from Broadway, and you look way, way above the door, there's a niche. And in that niche is a resin replica of this statue of St. Paul. The original is about 500 pounds, and it is amazing that it has lived as long as it has, considering it's made of wood. But it was being destroyed by the weather over time. So we thought, when this huge renovation was done to St. Paul's Chapel in 2016, we thought, let's take St. Paul out of the weather and put him inside, and we'll leave a replica up so that everyone can see what it used to look like out from the street. But St. Paul, the original, gets to live in safety inside. The chapel is an example of that colonial style of church. You'll notice there aren't any stained glass windows. That was very of the style. It was of the time, especially in Protestant churches at that time. The focus was again on the service, on the preaching, not on decoration. So you'll see a lot of Episcopal churches, especially in the South, from that period of time, from the late 1700s, mid to late 1700s, they're very kind of austere compared to churches today. But that's because the focus was on the service rather than on how pretty the building might be. From 1776 to 1790, the whole congregation of Trinity Parish worshiped in St. Paul's Chapel. So this place would have been packed on Sunday. The balconies, all the pews, everybody would have been crowding in here on Sundays for worship, including the brief period of time that New York City was the capital of the United States. Anybody who was a member of the Church of England and later the Episcopal Church after the Revolution, who was in federal government in New York at that time, would have come to St. Paul's to worship on Sunday, including George Washington. Several records in George Washington's diaries, he mentions coming to St. Paul's for worship several times. Most famously, Washington and other members of the new government came from Federal Hall, which is just down the road, after the inauguration to St. Paul's for a prayer service. We don't exactly know what happened during the service because that was not recorded. We don't have any programs or pamphlets, but we know that prayers for Thanksgiving were said during that service as the clergy prayed for the new nation, prayed for the members of government, and prayed for the success of this new endeavor of the new nation. So this is a painting of the Great Seal of the United States, which is all over the place. It's on our money, it's on a lot of buildings, it's on official documents. It looks a little different nowadays. It is a little bit more noticeably a bald eagle if you look at the Great Seal now. This bird looks a little bit less like a bald eagle than our typical bald eagle now, but it is an eagle. This is one of the first depictions of the Great Seal of the United States in existence in the country. The vestry commissioned this painting in 1785. We don't know exactly why they wanted to have a painting of the Great Seal. I suspect it's because almost everyone on the vestry at that time was either a veteran of the Revolution, had been a delegate to Continental Congress, or had been a member of the Sons of Liberty, or all three. We had incredibly politically active members of the vestry at that time. And of course, because the congregation was worshiping in St. Paul's Chapel in 1785 when the painting was complete, that's why it was hung here. In this spot as well was what was lovingly called George Washington's pew. Back when St. Paul's was built, we had box pews in here, which you might have seen a picture of before. It's a little box, almost looks like a bench, that your pew would sit in. So there was a little wall in front of you with a book rack for your prayer books and your hymnal to sit in, and a little doorway to walk into your pew every morning. So it was your own little private box, kind of like an opera box or something. But the box pew that was sat right here, or right about here, was the box pew that they reserved for George Washington to sit in whenever he came for worship. And for many, 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 many years afterwards, people would come to see where Washington had sat. So that's why the painting of the Great Seal is here, is because this spot is where George Washington would sit during worship. And opposite to the Great Seal of the United States, on the other side of St. Paul's Chapel, is the Great Seal of the State of New York. And it is over on this wall because on the floor in front of it was the pew reserved for the governor whenever he wanted to come to St. Paul's for worship. The oldest graves here are from 1767. And the chapel was finished in October of 1766. So just a couple of months after the chapel was finished, the first members of the congregation were buried in the chapel churchyard. The churchyard here at St. Paul's and at Trinity are testaments to what these congregations have survived over the last, in Trinity's case, 328 years. In St. Paul's case, almost 260 years. Trinity Church, Trinity Churchyard, St. Paul's Churchyard. These places we've seen today have witnessed collectively 328 years of American history, New York City history, and I think embody the spirit of that history still today.
Our live coverage of America's 250th birthday celebration continues now in Boston as the city hosts the annual July 4th Faneuil Hall Oration, a public address that dates to 1771, commemorating the Boston Massacre and celebrating America's independence. You're watching live coverage here on C-SPAN 3.
Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, Officer Minotti. Please remain standing. What a cue, right? It's now my pleasure, distinct honor to introduce the Commissioner of Veteran Services for the City of Boston, 20-year Navy veteran, Mr. Robert Santiago, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good morning, fellow Americans. How are you doing today? And also our guests from around the world, happy Independence Day. Before I continue, I would like to recognize the gentlemen that are with me here today that are going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance with us all. I have the commander, the state commander of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Craig DeOld. State commander of the Disabled American Veterans, Dennis Devine. And past state commanders of the Disabled American Veterans, Bob, good looking, sorry, I got his last name. The Pledge of Allegiance holds a unique importance, and on this 4th of July, the 250th anniversary of our nation, and here in the city of Boston, where the American Revolution was born, we gather to celebrate our independence and to reflect on the values that unite us all as a people. When we recite the Pledge of Allegiance, first written in 1892 and later evolved and included in the U.S. Flag Code in 1942, we're not just honoring the flag. We are renewing a promise to be one nation, a promise to defend liberty and to strive for justice, and that is justice for all. Yeah. Today, let us recite the Pledge of Allegiance not out of routine, but with gratitude for those who secured our freedoms, with reflection on the ideals that those freedoms represent, and with the resolve to live those ideals through our actions each and every day. And in doing so, we not only honor our flag, but every American who has served, sacrificed, and believed in the promise of this nation. So at this time, please everyone, join me in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Now, you can be seated. Thank you, Commissioner Santiago. This spring, the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, 8th graders from across the state engaged in a competition called We Declare, in which they were asked to submit creative videos reciting the Declaration of Independence. We are so proud that the winners of that competition are our very own Boston Public Schools students. Hailing from the Boston Green Academy, some of them are here with us in the crowd today. Thank you to some generous private partners, including Fidelity. Winning students in classrooms are each receiving $2,500 scholarships. There's no need for me to say, let's give them a round of applause. You all have done it. So thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the video monitors as we get to enjoy their fantastic winning video, We Declare.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people
to dissolve political bands which have connected them with another,
they should declare the causes
which have held unto the separation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal,
that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights,
that among these are life,
liberty,
and the pursuit of happiness.
Para garantizar estos derechos,
governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers
from the consent of the governed.
That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends,
it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it,
and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles,
and organizing its powers to such form
as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Y felicidad.
Y felicidad.
So as I had mentioned earlier, that there are some members of the group that were part of making the video. If you are part of Green Academy or just making the video, please stand and be acknowledged. Thank you. And now, my distinct privilege and honor to introduce the Mayor of the City of Boston, Mayor Michelle Wu.
Thank you so much, Colonel Fife. Good morning, everyone. Or rather, I should say good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Boston. Welcome to the cradle of liberty. Welcome to a community that strives every day after that unfinished vision of America. Boston is determined to build the America we deserve by ensuring that the fullest meaning of those words, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, actually reach every single person, every family in our community, and we couldn't do it without our people. I am incredibly honored to be here on this stage with such distinguished guests who represent our community and the national conscience and voice of the city of Boston and America. Thank you so much to Colonel Fife, Officer McNulty, as always, for his service to our city and the beautiful national anthem, to Commissioner Santiago, to Amanda Shea, poet, activist, artist, and just all-around leader in the city. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will also hear in a bit, a little bit more from these three distinguished leaders in the front. Very honored to be here alongside Nathaniel Shidley, who stewards some of the most important spaces in our city. It is our delight and honor to welcome back Ta-Nehisi Coates to Boston. We're thrilled. And of course, I want to give Miss Kenyatta Matthews a shout out too for coming along with them, for being part of our celebration here in Boston. You all should know that today's, we marked the anniversary and we're still marking the loss of Frank Zarba, so we wish Miss Jean a very happy anniversary today. I learned in the back room that today is also Mr. Coates' father's birthday. And so he's getting right back on a plane, so he's choosing to spend this time with us. On behalf of the city of Boston and all our visitors, please tell your dad, happy, happy birthday from us. And of course, one of our most important partners in the city, Imari Paris Jeffries has been the leader for connecting our communities, for ensuring that we're telling the true history of our city with the Everyone 250 markers, and for in every way that the Embrace and this 250th shares the story of our city. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your entire team. Okay, I'm almost getting to my remarks. I want to say thank you to our Boston 250 leadership partners for making all of this possible. And can you please, 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 everyone, join me in thanking our city workers, our Parks Department, there's a lot happening in Boston this summer, and so I hope everyone has been enjoying some of the most beautiful and delightful experiences and spaces in the city. It's possible because of our Parks Department, our police officers, our special events team, our public works team, all of our cabinet officials, many of whom are here, and all of everyone who serves on a board or a commission. Thank you for making our city who we are 365 days a year. We've had a full day already. District Attorney Kevin Hayden and I walked the whole length of the 4th of July parade this morning. We ended at the old State House, where the Ancient and Honorables read the Declaration from that balcony for the 250th year in a row to our city. Boston always does the 4th of July big. But this particular anniversary has been many years in the making for us. Our role started long before 250 years ago, and we've been marking each of those milestones. And we're also broadening the story of how each of those milestones came to be. When you break it down, 250 years comes out to about 9-10 generations. 10 generations ago, every one of our families was leading a very different life. Some had deep roots on this land going back centuries. Thank you, Jean-Luc, for representing the North American Indian Community Center of Boston here. Others lived thousands of miles away across oceans. Some had been brought here against their will to build this country, including for this very building. One generation at a time, they made their way to Boston. They crossed the Atlantic and the Pacific, the Rio Grande, the Darien Gap. They started over, worked impossible hours under grueling conditions. They fought for independence and freedom. Every American family has a story about sacrifice. Someone who left the only home they had ever known. Someone who had worked 2 jobs to support their kids. Someone who served in uniform and put their life on the line for the idea of America. Someone who stood up or sat down for a cause bigger than themselves. You might not know all their names back in your family line, but someone, somewhere back down that line, or sitting beside you this morning, is the reason you are here and the reason America still exists. Because through the good years and the terrible ones, each of those 10 generations has handed their children an America with more life, more liberty, and more freedom to pursue happiness. So today, we honor the working people whose faces aren't in the paintings behind and around us, but who also built the country we came here to celebrate. My own family is part of that story. 2 generations ago, they fled China for Taiwan. A generation after that, my parents left their home to take a chance on the United States because they believed this place could give their children opportunities they never had. And today, their daughter stands here before you as mayor of the city where the American Revolution began. Maybe someday, the mayor of Boston will stand here on our 300th birthday, or our 500th, and count backwards through the generations to us. We have no idea who they'll be, and I don't think anyone in 1776 would have imagined me at this podium today. In fact, I know that for a fact. When I first became mayor, one of the most stressful first tasks to do was through our renovation of City Hall Plaza. We were redoing the entire plaza so that the original steps that really made it difficult for people to get around with any kind of mobility issues were leveled out, that it would be a space for everyone to have universal accessibility. And we created a circle in the corner over by the Federal Building where each of the names of Boston's neighborhoods is engraved in the ground. It's a secret that maybe we can pass down to next generations, that in the very middle of that circle, underneath the city seal, is where a time capsule is buried, as we did that renovation. And I learned just a couple weeks into the job and doing this, that it's a tradition for every mayor, when there's a time capsule that is buried, they have to write a letter to the next mayor that will be there whenever they open that back up. And it felt like a huge responsibility and pressure to say, what am I going to say to a mayor potentially hundreds of years in the future? So I did a little research, and we went through the archives and pulled up the 3 other letters that have been received when previous time capsules were opened. There was one from 1830, one from 1930, and one from 1981. And there were 2 things that were similar about all those letters. The first was that each of my predecessors used that opportunity, talking to a future mayor, to dream big. They wrote about wildly innovative and imaginative discoveries that might happen in the future, wishing for medical breakthroughs, predicting new fuels, and even flying cars. But the second similarity was how each of the letters started. The one from 1830 began, "Sir." The one from 1930 said, "Dear Sir," a little more polite. And the letter from 1981 began, "Dear Mr. Mayor." They could picture flying cars, but not a woman or a mom reading the letter that would be on the other end of it. Whoever stands here next shouldn't have to feel like a surprise, not to the country and not to themselves. Every kid growing up in our city should know what's possible here. If a child in Roxbury or Chinatown or Mattapan, East Boston, learns that people like them built this country and this city, then leading it doesn't sound so crazy. That's what we owe the next 10 generations, the whole story. So while the federal government tries to narrow the story of America, Boston keeps expanding it. Three weeks ago, our city archaeologist, Joe Bagley, took a map that was drawn 251 years ago and went looking for the fort that colonists built on the eve of the Battle of Bunker Hill. His team found it. Beneath the lawn at the base of the Bunker Hill Monument, they uncovered the trench itself, along with musket balls and gun flints from the original battle. Their work throughout the city has helped us have not only the stories, but the tangible proof and artifacts of our history. And today, I'm excited to help convey another discovery that they had. Our Granary Burying Ground Conservation Team recently found and restored the gravestone of a man they believe was enslaved under the name Sebastian Lake and who died free in 1729. That discovery is likely one of the oldest gravestones of a free Black person in America. The history had been there all along. We just had to go look and share the story. So we're looking everywhere. This year, with our partners at Everyone 250, Boston is installing more than 40 new historic markers across our neighborhoods. From the old Hyde Park Town Hall, where women cast votes 50 years before it was legal as an act of civil disobedience, to the site where Boston Public School students, the predecessors of our BGA students, to the site where our BPS students first walked out of class to protest segregation. Recognizing the everyday revolutionaries who changed the course of this country, even if their names hadn't yet appeared in many history books. Because the better we understand where the past 250 years actually came from, the more clearly we can see where the next 10 generations can go. When our kids open a textbook, visit a museum, or walk through our city, I want them to find proof of what's possible in America. The sacrifice, the determination, the struggles and progress, and the work ahead to build the America we deserve together. It is now my honor to continue a tradition Boston has kept since 1771. Please welcome this year's Faneuil Hall Orator, the President and CEO of Revolutionary Spaces, Dr. Nathaniel Scheidle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It is an incredible honor to speak from this stage today on the 250th anniversary of American independence. For me, it is also something of a full circle moment. You see, my interest in the past was first awakened by my late mother, Dr. Harlow Scheidle. When I hit the second grade, my mother began taking graduate courses in history, initially to keep her mind busy. And one of her very first research papers was about the 4th of July orations delivered from this stage during the decades before the Civil War. Orations, some of them as long as 2 to 3 hours, I promise, I'll be briefer. But orations in which the memory of Boston's role in the Revolution was reshaped to serve the political agenda of New England's most powerful men. She did not care very much for the politics of the orators, and because she was a sleep talker, I would sometimes wake up at night to hear her arguing with them loudly. Everett, you're wrong. In truth, her language was a fair bit saltier than that, but I do wish that she could have been here all the same. During the 1760s and the 1770s, this great hall looked very different than it does today, or even in Edward Everett's day. It served then as the seat of Boston's town meeting and as an important gathering place for public dialogue. So many fiery speeches decrying parliamentary rule were given here by the likes of Samuel Adams and James Otis. So many boisterous protests, and also sometimes violent protests, aimed at Crown officials and prominent loyalists were organized here, that Bostonians in time came to think of this place, as we've already heard, as the cradle of liberty, a description that is sometimes attributed to John Adams, who in the early 19th century wrote down all of his memories and gave nifty little titles to every building he could think of. So, for example, the old State House, which our organization cares for, is the place where the child independence was born. But here, Faneuil Hall was the cradle of liberty. And indeed, this was a place of origin. This is a place where, in the fire of debate and protest, our nation's most enduring questions were forged. Who speaks for me? How is my voice heard? What do we mean when we say, we the people? We live today in a time of extraordinary division, and as we navigate this challenging moment, it can be tempting for all of us to believe that the founding generation may have given us a clear set of directives, definitive answers to our most important questions. When I speak with visitors at the museums that we operate at the Old State House and Old South Meeting House, I'm often asked by folks what the founders, definitely capital T, capital F, thought about a particular issue. And I always respond with the same answer. Which founders? Which founders? When the authors of the Declaration of Independence that we so wonderfully heard read in public for the 251st time, I believe, today, was written, those authors wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." But they did not imagine that the rights of, quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should in fact apply to those who were enslaved. However, enslaved Bostonians clearly imagined something very different when 2 years before the Declaration of Independence, they petitioned the colonial government to be, in their words, liberated and made free men of this community, positing simply that they had, in common with other men, a natural right to be free. They were not waiting around for Thomas Jefferson and other members of the Continental Congress to tell them that they could use those words. Early America was a vast and turbulent place, and the question of the colony's representation in Parliament took shape alongside so many other struggles, of those in bondage to be free, of women to be recognized in the courts and to have a voice in public life, of unpropertied white men to secure the right to vote, and of Native communities to protect or recover their sovereignty, to name only some of the many, many struggles underway. We understand better both their past, our past, and our present by recognizing that the revolution's end left unresolved what many of those founders fought for. Unsurprisingly, their struggles continued and still, in many cases, continue in our own time. For 250 years and more, during the founding era, no less than our own, Americans have argued over whose voice matters, how our voices are heard, and what recourse we should have if our voices should be silenced or overlooked. This argument, it is the deep current at the very center of American life, that every generation grapples with those questions, argues over them, and seeks to find answers for their time. It connects us across generations, even as it divides us in any particular moment, including our own. We recognize this implicitly when we call upon the memory of the founding era to advocate for change, to find common ground, and underscore the gravity of our own claims in this moment. When Boston's black abolitionists made the case for granting citizenship to those in bondage during the 1850s, they pointed to the figure of Crispus Attucks. He was the African and indigenous descended sailor who had liberated himself from slavery and then been one of the 5 to die in the Boston Massacre. Attucks, they argued, was the first to give his life for the cause of America. To build support for women's right to vote, suffragists organized right here in this building on the 100th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, a New England Women's Tea Party. And of course, labor leaders, civil rights leaders, and change makers of all types have claimed the words of the Declaration to underscore the justice of their causes. We in Boston, and all of you who visit, are fortunate that our city is so rich in structures and places that connect us in a tangible way to the story of the nation's founding. Faneuil Hall, the Old State House, Old South Meeting House, the Paul Revere House, Old North Church, King's Chapel, the Shirley Eustace House, the list goes on and on. Bunker Hill, Dorchester Heights, so many other structures that have survived and places that we know. These are places to learn, they're places to explore, where we can always discover something new about our city's past, as we have just heard. But they are also, and perhaps most importantly, places for us to gather as we do today, where we can recognize that we are part of something larger as we grapple with our most challenging questions, as we imagine together a better and more just future for ourselves and our city, as we commit ourselves, as I hope all of us in this room today will do, to writing the next chapter in the story that began here more than 250 years ago. Perhaps John F. Kennedy put it best when he spoke right here at this stage in 1960, and I'm not going to try to do his accent. This old hall reminds us of how far we've been as Americans and what we must do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nat, for that incredible oration. We know your mom is here watching, and so grateful for her in the long line of legacy to you, too. We have a really special treat up next as well for this 250th year. I wanted to shout out 2 additional city team members who have poured everything into crafting this 250th bigger and better than ever. The first is someone who's known around City Hall as Mr. 250, Alex Meadow. Thank you for all that you do. And, of course, the one and only Amy Yendel, who's organized World Cup, Sail Boston, all the parades. So next we get to witness what will be a really important conversation for Boston, a fireside chat between 2 leaders who can help us imagine and create what's about to come next for our country. One of our next guests has spent his career refusing to settle for the abridged version of America. Ta-Nehisi Coates is an award-winning author and journalist. His recent books include The Water Dancer and The Message. He's currently a contributing editor at Vanity Fair, and we're so excited and again grateful for him for joining us to connect history, legacy to this moment in our city and beyond. He will be joined in conversation by the president and CEO of Embrace Boston, a partner on the city's 250th efforts and everything else that we do throughout our communities, Dr. Amari Paris Jeffries. Please welcome Amari Paris Jeffries and Ta-Nehisi Coates.
How's everyone doing today? You know, believe it or not, I started with straight hair when we came here, and it is so hot. I hope by the next 250 they put air conditioning in this place. Madam Mayor, can we make sure that whoever the next mayor in your letter, you say, put air condition in Faneuil Hall in that letter. It's so great to be with you on this Independence Day. Can we clap it up for all of us who bore this heat? My goodness. You know, our mayor has been emphasizing the importance of everyday heroes, and you know the work of Embrace is to not only acknowledge everyday heroes, but illuminate public memory. So I want to acknowledge a couple of people in the crowd, if you bear with me. There are 2 people who are memorialized on the Embrace Plaza who are here in the audience. Mr. Jose Masso, who is sitting right there. And Mrs. Charlotte Nelson, who is sitting right there trying to hide. So I just want to acknowledge them. And right behind Charlotte Nelson is Michael Curry, who is a national civil rights leader and national board member of the NAACP. Michael, stand up. Quit trying to be shy. I just want to acknowledge all their work. And definitely want to shout out my wife, because I don't want to get in trouble. I gotta go home tonight. So, but you're not here to you know. I'm a poor man's comedian, a failed comedian. So you don't want to hear my bad jokes. You're here to see Mr. Coates. And so it's so great to be with you. I was fanboying you in the back, and the first thing I asked you to do was sign my comics. So thank you for humoring me. Mr. Coates is a comic book writer. I hope you have read the comics. And so I want to start with that.
You don't want to start with Jaylen Brown?
Oh man. Oh, see, you want to start something
too soon.
Interview over, fireside chat over. You must be a Philly implant here.
No.
Get him out of here. But you know, I think the magic of I'm gonna change subjects real quick. The city is in mourning. We're trying to come back.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That was wrong.
Give me back my rag, man. I gave him a rag in the back. I was like, brother. But I'm a comic book nerd. There's a bunch of us who are comic book nerds, and I think the interesting thing about comics is, the democratic nature. When you think about Kirby and Stan Lee, there's so many Easter eggs embedded within comics. It allows you to tell the truth in ways that novels and essays don't allow you to do that. And for their time, they were revolutionary in that way. A man who is a monster is literally a monster. A country that hoards resources is a country that hoards resources. And so when Marvel handed you the keys to Black Panther, how many of you seen Black Panther? At least seen the movie, right? T'Challa, the king of Wakanda, the most beloved character in the most beloved, idolized nation in comics, the first thing you did was to put the throne on sale. You wrote that his own people rose up and asked, why should any one man rule the throne? I mean, that is the most 4th of July story that I've ever heard. And so on the day that America celebrates literally overthrowing a king, I mean, what were you trying to work out on these themes of self-governance through that comic?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I'm sorry to have begun by insulting you during your period of mourning. So please forgive me. Please forgive me for that. I once did a talk in the Bay Area, and this must have been like right after the Warriors had lost to Cleveland, and I began my talk by articulating why I thought LeBron James was the greatest player in the league right now. So I got booed, so at least you guys didn't do that. So I'm about to get booed here again. So yeah, thanks for not holding that too much against me. There was a line that a sentence actually in my second book, Between the World and Me, that I took forever to articulate. And what I mean by that is I drafted the sentence over and over and over and over again, over the course of months actually, to get it right. And the sentence is, race is the child of racism, not the father. And the point is, races don't exist. They are not inherent qualities to people. There are systems that assign qualities to people and then distribute power accordingly. And if you accept that, that does not just mean that any group of people could, end up enslaved, genocided, colonized, or pick whatever malady you wish. It also means that any group of people could also do it. And so when I had the opportunity to write Black Panther, I think a lot of us, who are comic book fans, took great pride in this, all-Black nation, never been colonized, advanced. But the history of human civilizations that achieve that type of power is not a great one. And I thought it would be a betrayal of my politics, and my own perspective of the world, and my deep belief in the common humanity of all people, and thus the common vices of all people, to write it as though it were a fairy tale, and to, not write it out of the same spirit that, I write anything else, when I'm, critiquing this country.
Yeah, and I want to stay on this theme of comic books because, I think another comic run that people might not know that you had an opportunity to frame was Captain America. And so, sticking on this 4th of July independence theme, Captain America, this is a character that's literally draped in the American flag, his origin story, World War II. And so the run is a story of a man trying to win back a country that stopped believing in him. And I think here's why this framing of a country that stopped believing in America is important. And so in 1958, there was a survey that asked Americans if they trusted their government. And in 1958, 73% of Americans said yes. And so today, Pew asked that survey, did they believe in their government? Did they trust their government? And most Americans, 17% of Americans, only 17% of Americans said they believed in their government. And so on our country's 250th birthday, on the semi-quincentennial, and thinking about this theme, Steve Rogers trying to win back this trust, right? And that was his theme. And I won't blow it for you. You really need to go by the series when you leave here. And I think the way that you wrote it, you'll have to read for yourself to see what happens. You know, once trust is broken between America and individuals and people, you know, what does a country need to do to win that trust back? You know, what's that road look like for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the things I was really interested in that, and again, you know, it's just a crossover to my larger politics and my larger literature. You know, the numbers you cite there, they did not happen by magic. There are people who profit off of disunion. There are people who become billionaires.
That's right. Off
of, you know, not just attacking folks' trust in the government that they elect in a democracy, but also attacking folks' basic trust in each other. You know, and I say that as somebody that, you know, has certainly made my bones as, you know, one of, you know, the biggest and loudest critiquers, you know, of some of the romanticism about, you know, what America is, what people are, what Americans are, exceptionalism, you know, or so forth. But I never do that out of a deep belief in innate evil in people, or an inability, you know, for people to reconcile themselves, you know, to each other. I was, you know, listening to the Pledge of Allegiance earlier, you know, which quite frankly I was not raised to participate in. But I did feel like it was important to participate in it here. And the reason why is because even as we have our particular individual beliefs, you can't make a new home. Like, this is my home.
We're here, right? That's
I'm here. I'm a part of this. You know what I mean? I may not like how it happened. It may make me really, really angry how it happened sometimes. I may not like how politics are being conducted, but I am American. I am American. And that, you know, fundamental... You know, even if y'all clap for that, I have a much more mixed reaction. But it's a truth. You understand what I'm saying? Like it's a basic truth. And once you accept that truth, you know, then you got to figure out how we're going to get along. And I think one of the tragedies, particularly I would say out of politics of the past 4 years, is that there have been so many people who have made so much money, not just in destroying that basic trust, but in destroying the very idea that you are even part of, you know, the same sort of thing. I saw this thing, you know, and I understand that we want air conditioning in here, but I saw this, you know, my mayor just gave this advisory, you know, please keep your air conditioning at 78. And for the purpose of sowing division, you know, for the purpose of, you know, harvesting more clicks, which are themselves money, by the way.
Yes.
You know, folks made like this is not a thing that, you know, governments, you know, in red states and in blue states and even, you know, up to the White House themselves, you know, don't advise. You know, for what? You know, for what? And I think the answer to that is so much of our politic now happens not in person like we are now, not across a dinner table, not across a lunch table, but, you know, it happens out of our phones. on machines, and we say things that are not always our best selves. And on the other side of that are people harvesting that attention for money. A guy's a trillionaire right now.
Yes.
That owns a lot. He's a trillionaire. And part of that is controlling the network by which, people talk to each other. And so I think if you want to move to a place where you have greater trust, we have to understand that, the kind of values that were spoken about, before me, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the trust you talk about, that's not magic, man. You know what I mean? You don't just sit back and that sort of naturally happens. It's a done thing. It has to be built. And I think we are unfortunately under the sway, certainly in one party, but not just in that party, of people who have made their bones by telling us that we can't do things together, that government, is not to be trusted, that, government is not to be, that we need to, run, certain people. I'm all good with running certain people out, by the way. But I'm not good with running the institutions themselves out.
Yes.
And the last thing I'll say about this is I have, for the past 10 years of my life, spent some time abroad. And one of the things I have realized, like I've seen countries that do not have the wealth that this country has, and yet are themselves wealthier countries. And what I mean by that is they do not have individuals who are as wealthy as we have here. But they manage to do great things. Their airports are better than ours. Their public spaces are better than ours.
Yes.
I went to Senegal, which is not, an economic peer of this country in any shape or fashion. And yet when the sun set, at the end of the day, I watched the people of Dakar come out and enjoy a public collective moment of exercise and physical fitness on equipment that, must have been built some 50 years ago. And so I think we have to recognize that something has not just been lost. Something has been taken and it's been converted. And it's been converted into profits for, a very, very small clique of people.
Yeah, I think one of the blessings, and we're fortunate to have a mayor that's invested in the social infrastructure of our city. But one of the blessings of being a host city to the World Cup is that we've gotten to see the emergence of that happening. And so I'm understanding what you're saying, and having visited other countries, you see other countries have that. I think we're so close to Montreal, and when my wife and I drive to Montreal, you see that happening, and sometimes we say to ourselves, we wish we had that here. I'm not sure why we don't have enough. And so it's difficult for, I think, a mayor like ours to come in a place that when she's trying to single-handedly change years of one way of thinking. And so I want to give our hats off to our mayor for the work that she's doing. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. It's not easy. The World Cup has helped us leverage that as a city. The 250 has helped us leverage that, but we have some ways. We have some ways to go. We've also illuminated these everyday heroes. We've used markers and monuments as a way to tell the stories of everyday heroes. I want to acknowledge someone else, Lamerchi Frazier, who's sitting there in the audience. She had the installation at the ICA. I have the book with some of her art. I want to just illuminate her work. And so the work that I do at Embrace, and there's some of the Embrace staff members are in here. We think about monuments as part of public memory. And one of the things that we are working on, our next monument project, is focused on Frederick Douglass. And Douglass, as you know, spoke. You can give it up for Frederick Douglass. He spoke here at Faneuil Hall several times, and one of the most important speeches that he gave, not here in Faneuil Hall, but one of the important speeches he gave was, "What to the slave is the 4th of July." The contradiction that he named in the speech, I think it's felt in this room, and you've kind of heard it illuminated in several of the remarks that the mayor and Nat and others have gave. And, monuments is, how America argues with itself. There are over 710 Confederate monuments. There are 200 plus schools named after Confederate leaders, 7 waterways named after Confederate leaders, 7 major bridges named after Confederate leaders in your home city of Baltimore or home state of Maryland. There's several structures still named after Confederate leaders. I mean, if you were at the design table with us, thinking about what it means to create a new monument project dedicated to Douglass, the abolitionist, thinking about looking forward to the next 250, what would you insist be a part of this project with social infrastructure in mind?
Oh, I'm completely unqualified to answer that question. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I have made a habit throughout my...
Maybe I got to ask the missus, because we were geeking over there in the background about monuments.
She's probably going to tell you the same thing. I think I've tried to make a habit of being very clear on what I know and what I don't know.
But talk about social infrastructure, right? Because monuments have the opportunity to create the type of social infrastructure that you mentioned about Senegal, right? Because it's like stone soup. When you create a monument, they both reverberate a history, but they allow people to pour a piece of themselves in it. And it speaks for generations after generations, and people return to it. And so that 50-year-old exercise equipment you mentioned is a form of a monument, and people return to it. And so when you think about the travels and other places in Paris and Senegal and other cities that you've been to, those permanent structures that people return to, what have you seen that's missing in the type of the permanent structures that are in American cities? We know what the Confederate monuments look like. What's missing in some of our neighborhoods?
Well, obviously, the first problem is like you can't have a monument that's named after a lie. You want the monument to be true. That probably is a baseline that we don't seem to be able to clear in this country right now. So that is the first thing. I guess when I think about travel and what I've seen abroad, the first thing is they're really beautiful. I think beauty, in and of itself, you want to, return to spaces. I guess if I think about my childhood and spaces in Baltimore, there probably were earnest, but places that I did not necessarily want to return to. They may have said the right thing, but not necessarily been captivating as works of art themselves. And I think the second thing is, it's always good when those spaces are actually spaces. In other words, when they're actually public spaces. So I guess one of the things I would think about, and you guys are probably way, way ahead of me on this, you know what I mean? Again, I really, really try not to talk about things that I have not, written and researched on. But I do think having spaces that are actually functional is really, really important. In other words, having spaces that don't just, maybe not honor Douglass, but are somehow functional and exhibit what his vision of the world actually is. If that makes any sense.
It does.
I hope it does, because I don't know how you do that, but.
It does. I appreciate that. I think I got a couple more questions, right? I don't know if somebody's keeping time. 5 more questions or 5 more minutes?
I think 5 minutes.
Oh. I got a list of questions. All right. You and I are both fathers, right?
Yeah.
And so, thinking about a lot of your work, I think one of the things that people appreciate about your writing is that you write not about hope for hope's sake. I think it's pragmatic. It's not cynical. It's honest. And so when we think about young people, you've given them an opportunity, and you've given all of us an opportunity to have a clear-eyed view of the nation. but also giving them an opportunity to have a claim to something, a clear-eyed claim to something. But thinking about the first pieces that you've written to now, I think what was not present was AI, the emergence of social media in the way that is available to them now. What's the message that we can tell young people in the face of AI, in the face of social media, in the way that was not available to them 10, 15 years ago?
Well, I think the first thing you can do is not be a billionaire executive and go before and go before their graduation ceremony and tell them their degree is worthless because you're erasing their jobs. I don't know why people think that's a good idea to do. And then get mad when they're booed, like, why are you booing me? Look, I think we owe young people an apology. I think, first of all, we owe young people an apology. I'm not a Luddite, I believe in technology. I think, technology's fine, but I think when you find yourself having to pass mandates to get people to use it, I have questions about that technology. Or rather, I have questions about the intentions behind that technology. That's probably what I should say. When the greatest thing you can tell me about your technology is that it will erase jobs. I'm all for efficiency, but I have real questions about that. This hits me very, very personally because I teach writing, and I've taught writing. I taught writing actually at MIT, not too far from here. God, it's been almost 15 years ago. And those kids were so smart. And it was so, sharp. I thought I was coming to this, science and engineering school. And I didn't know what to expect in terms of the level of writing, but it really was proof to me that, writing comes from here and it can be, in anywhere, in any, person. And so as somebody who has loved the process, not just of publishing books, but the process of actually writing itself, which is to say, having a notion or a question in my head that I cannot work out and using writing to figure that out, teaching young people to do that, watching them do that, watching them be rewarded by the process of that. Again, I just will return to this, over and over, the idea that people have decided that they are going to profit from robbing young people of that. I think that's a problem. I think that's a huge problem. And I think to the extent that, we're bragging about robbing them of it. We're hey, this is, you know what I mean? And in some cases bragging, but in other cases doing this kind of theatrical approach where we act like we are not in control. Where we say things like, oh, the technology is just gonna happen. There's nothing that can be done about it. No, there is something. This goes back to your question about trust, right? Because there's this just baseline belief that these things happen by magic. And what I'm trying to get across, and I guess what I'm most concerned about, is there are people who are making ungodly sums of money by pretending as though this is a natural process. They are robbing you. They are robbing your children. They are hacking into the brains of your children as we speak and making it seem like they're Darwin on the Galapagos Islands and they're just observing something that's happening. And it deeply, deeply upsets me, to say nothing about what this is doing to the environment, by the way. To say nothing about that and to say nothing about why, you're asking about air conditioning in here right now, which is also not in and of itself a natural process. That's a whole other conversation. My point is, and I guess this really strikes me at this moment. Here we are, everybody's proud, excited to be here on the 250th, anniversary. And I just have to say, the fact that we have convinced ourselves that our future and our children's future is no longer in our own hands is an abomination. Like, look, I'm here for the speeches, I'm here for the conversation, I'm here for the poetry, I'm here for, so I think all of that's important. But if you, because this is gonna happen all around the country, if people walk out of these celebrations and just go on with their lives, I question how much they believe in the pageantry which they just witnessed. And I'm sorry, I know I've gone on a long time, but I was thinking about this as I was coming, because this has particular importance here in Boston, okay? Because Boston is a revolutionary city. And not just one time, not just one time. When the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850, this was like the place where they said, oh God, I'm gonna try not to curse. Where they said, we're not doing that. That's my nice way of saying it. They said, we're out on that. You know, like, this is the city, you know, of Shadrach Minkins. You know what I mean? Like, this is the city of Anthony Burns. You know, this is the city where, you know, people aggressively, violently even, you know what I mean, fought, you know, to make all of those, you know, again, really, really beautiful words that we just heard true. And so in this moment where I just feel like we're just pouring ourselves into our phones while these people rob us and rob our children, I just don't know how we celebrate these words and not, you know what I mean, walk out and act.
Yeah. My last question, if we get this right, what does America look like by 2025? If we get this right.
By 2025?
By 275. By 275.
You know, America gets to still be here.
America gets.
That's what it gets.
That's it. Amen.
And that's not promised to anyone.
That's right.
That's not promised to any country. That's not promised to any society. It gets to still be here.
All right, we'll take it. We definitely got some work to do. Boston's the place, and the home of revolutionaries. This room is full of revolutionaries. Thank you, revolutionaries. Happy semi-quincentennial. Let's give it up for Ta-Nehisi Coates.
How was that for our first fireside chat, huh? Thank you. Thank you once again. Now it's my honor to introduce Amanda Shea. She's a Boston, Roxbury-based spoken word artist and cultural leader, a 3-time Boston Music Award winner, and always shows up for our city and our youth. Please welcome Amanda Shea.
Hello, everyone. Where is Mr. 250? Why would you put me after this conversation? We're going to have our conversation. But in all seriousness, thank you so much for that conversation. It inspired the piece that I'm going to do right now, and to be able to perform in front of Mayor Wu. Wow. I'm just going to get into it. This is called The Work Still Ahead, and I just wrote and added some pieces while listening to that conversation, so it's a little fresh. "250 years. America still arriving, still introducing itself, still carrying luggage it pretends belongs to someone else. Today, we gather inside Faneuil Hall, a room where history argues with its own reflection. Named for a man who traded in human lives, remembered for voices that insisted human lives could never be property. Perhaps that is America. A house forever renovating its own foundation while standing inside it. How do we honor what was won here without forgetting what paid the admission? Maybe memory isn't a museum. Maybe it's a muscle. If we stop using it, someone else will decide what it remembers. History rarely arrives wearing a famous name. It comes disguised as a neighbor, a teacher, a father, an author, someone who signs one more petition, knocks on one more door, stands in one more meeting, believing small acts can bend large centuries. Revolution, it turns out, has always depended on ordinary hands. So what is a 250th anniversary? Not a birthday, a checkpoint, a moment, to ask whether that promise has grown larger than the myth, whether liberty has finally learned everyone's name. The struggle now is over memory itself. Some erase, others recover. Some build monuments, others build truth. Boston writes history back onto its sidewalks, reminding us that every street has been speaking long before we learned how to listen. And what do we leave the next generation? Not certainty, not innocence, a compass, the courage to question without surrendering, to love a country enough to tell it the truth. Because cynicism is a locked door, responsibility is a key. Perhaps that is the American project, not reaching perfection, but refusing to abandon the work. 250 years later, the revolution is no longer asking what kind of nation we inherited. It is asking what kind of ancestors we intend to become. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shea. Since 1783, for 250 years to be exact, the City of Boston has concluded our Independence Day exercises here at Faneuil Hall. Please remain seated while our guests exit the stage and make a clear exit through the center aisle. While you enjoy the playing of the Stars and Stripes by the Zava Military Band.
C-SPAN's America 250 coverage is supported by YouTube. You're watching C-SPAN 3, Democracy Unfiltered.
You look back on what you've achieved in your life, what makes you the happiest of what you've achieved so far?
This interview is the absolute apex.
Leaders seem to like to wear wigs. How come he didn't have a wig? President Trump said, I made a mistake the first time. I should have given it to you the first time.
That isn't what he said.
Your first book was called A Time to Kill. Right. How many publishers turned that down?
Well, all of them.
It's very rare to see Donald Trump laugh.
He doesn't like to smile in photos. He has what they call the stare. How would the stare?
When you go to the Oscars, did everybody say, oh, there's the author?
All the beautiful people go this way. And then they have another little path in the Oscars where the people like I go.
So you wrote a book about somebody who lived with wolves.
I interviewed a guy who lived with wolves, yep.
And is that safe to do that?
Absolutely not.
So I know you were not complaining. You were opinionated about the situation.